Hey everyone, I'm Kaitlyn Barnard.
And I'm Victor Gamov.
In this series, we chat with software developers and technology leaders to tackle your biggest API connectivity challenges.
Stay tuned to this episode for tools, tactics, strategies that will help you to take your distributed architectures to the next level. Let's begin.
So today, I'm super excited to welcome Henrik Blixt, product manager for Argo at Intuit. So Henrik's here today to talk to us all about Argo, which is an open source tool for Kubernetes and an incubating project of CNCF. So Henrik, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. So looking forward to our chat here. So like I said, my name is Henrik Blixt. I'm a product manager at Intuit, and I'm responsible for Argo, both internally within Intuit, and I'm also a maintainer in the Argo project. So I do a lot of the product management stuff in the community, work a lot with the community partners and CNCF and things like that.
Awesome. I would love to hear, just kind of talk a little bit about how you've ended up in this space and what your background and role on Argo looks like.
Sure. So I've been in and out of the open source community for a long time, ever since I first lay my hands on Linux back in the mid 90s. So it's been 5 years maybe now. So that's kind of been a thread that's gone through my whole career, in and out with Linux operating systems, worked with OpenStack for quite a few years. And now lately, I've been doing a lot of work around Kubernetes and Argo, of course. And I've always been, my whole professional life, I've always been a vendor. Vendors make the open source community tick, right? A lot of the people that contribute to open source are from vendor companies, and they do a lot of really good work and stuff for the community. But when you're working for vendor, there's always, especially as a product manager, there's always that kind of selling thing in the back of your head. So when I saw this opportunity, being a product manager for an open source project from an end user instead, that was a really interesting twist to me, and something that was a really interesting challenge, coming at it from just building a better project, building a better community, and don't have to worry about selling. It's all about just making Argo great.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most interesting things about kind of this CNCF ecosystem in particular is there's really just this common knowledge around the business value of this open source ecosystem and the projects that come into play. And I love seeing all of the vendors now that are really dedicating the upstream efforts and all the time to maintaining this community, because we've all agreed how important it is and what the value is there.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see, the community is growing. We have a large number of vendors that are involved in Argo as well, and the community keeps growing, the projects keep growing. So it's really exciting to be part of it.
How about we start off, just from the beginning here, and can you give us a high-level overview of what exactly the Argo project is?
Yeah, sure. So Argo is a little bit of an oddball when it comes to CNCF projects, because generally you have a project that has, solving a specific use case or a specific problem, whereas Argo is actually a collection of 4 projects that solve slightly, or actually quite different problems, to be honest. And those are Argo CD, which is more on the continuous deployment side. We have Argo Rollout, which is used for progressive delivery. Argo Workflows, which is a Swiss Army knife of a workflow orchestration engine, and then Argo Events, which is a event framework. So those kind of come together under the Argo umbrella, and the Argo itself was created about 5 years ago at a startup that was later acquired by Intuit. And we've been an incubating project with CNCF now for almost 2 years on the day, I think.
Wow. And that's a great segue, and you kind of started to touch on it, but what is the history behind Argo? What was the need and reason for its creation in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was, like I said, it was started about 5 years ago at a startup called Aplatix. And the first project in Argo is actually Argo Workflows, which was the first project that Aplatix was working on. And Intuit was going through a massive modernization and cloud native journey, and we realized we needed to change a lot of how we did our software development to be able to innovate faster and just be in lockstep with technology. So that startup was acquired by Intuit and basically tasked with building a whole new development platform built on cloud native technologies. And during the course of building that platform, additional needs popped up. So Argo Workflows was, like I said, the initial part of the platform. And then we realized, we started looking at GitOps, started using GitOps, that there weren't really any good tools out there. So Argo CD was born. And then as we started looking into how we roll out applications, especially at a fintech like Intuit, where we have high demands of uptime, especially during tax season. And then started looking at how do we build on and improve on how Kubernetes does rollouts of new applications and new versions, and hence rollouts was born. And during this whole phase, Argo events was actually developed by a company called BlackRock and donated to the project. So it's really a process of Intuit realizing these were the needs we had, and then building projects that fulfilled those needs to build this internal platform that we now have 5,000 developers using daily, and basically everything we run is now run on Argo, with Argo, and on Kubernetes.
I love that. That's such a nice example of kind of all those vendors coming together within this project. That's really neat. The other thing I'm super curious about is I feel like I have been seeing Argo everywhere now. What has kind of been that recent catalyst of Argo's popularity?
Yeah, it's really exciting. I know there was CNCF released their annual survey a few weeks ago, and I saw that Argo, the production use of Argo increased like 115%. Wow. And looking at the responses in the details, you can see that over half of the companies that responded are either using Argo or evaluating it, which is just mind blowing coming from the vendor side. And if I had those numbers back in my vendor days, I'd be really, really excited. And I think there are a few things that that are coming together to drive that. Argo Workflow has been around for a long time, but ML and AI, is getting very commonplace now, and people are facing the same automation challenges that maybe we faced the whole drive of DevOps and things on the software development side a few years ago. So there's a lot of drive on that side, to get to the MLOps side of things. I don't think that anyone that's involved in cloud native have missed GitOps or haven't heard about GitOps. I mean, there's even a separate conference at KubeCon now specifically to GitOps, and I think that's been another big catalyst on the CD side, especially where a lot of companies are looking into and adopting GitOps. And then I think also it's a great project. We have a very diverse community. If you look at like the maintainers, for example, coming from something that was all Intuit, 100% dominated by Intuit. Intuit is now only a third of the maintainers, and the rest of the maintainers are spread across a large number of companies. So just that we have a very strong and very diverse community certainly helps as well. And then just the fact that Argo is really good at what it does.
Yeah, really speaks to that kind of value piece of just the project itself, but also how powerful the community coming together is to help build that. So you kind of touched on it there too, and I think one of the most interesting things about Argo is really all of the facets of the project. And as we've been talking, you've kind of mentioned there's two ways to look at it, right? Like the GitOps piece and then the machine learning piece. Yep. Could you talk just a little bit through kind of those two different use cases and the current state of Argo as a project that fits into that?
Yeah, sure. So we generally divide up the four projects, even though they're slightly different. We basically say that Argo CD and Argo rollouts are the ones that fit into the GitOps category, and then we have Argo workflows and Argo events that are more on the MLOps side, because that's generally how people use it. So our Argo CD, was basically built for GitOps, and it's a continuous delivery tool for Kubernetes that adheres to the GitOps principles and basically lets you manage your applications with Git as the source of truth. Of course, all being cloud native, all being built on Kubernetes, which makes all 4 projects easy to deploy anywhere. So that's kind of one of the core pieces of the GitOps piece. And then Argo Rollups kind of builds on top of that because there are some deficiencies in how Kubernetes does deployments. And Argo Rollups kind of plugs into Argo CD and your application deployments, allowing you to do, as the name implies, progressive delivery, kind of gradual rollout of your application. So you can do some really neat stuff in terms of slowly progressing a deployment of a new version. So you do 10% of your pods new version, and then you can run some automated checks, make sure everything is healthy, and then you progress to the next level. And every time you increase the number of pods or the amount of traffic, you do some checks to make sure it's healthy. So that kind of enhances what's already there in Kubernetes and Argo CD. So those two go really nicely together, and especially if a couple is like a service mesh, you can do some really cool traffic shaping and things like that. So Argo Workflows, then, on the other hand, is like I said, it's a container native workflow orchestration engine, and it's, even though we say in our Argo CD and rollouts, are the GitOps side of things, and workflows and events are MLOps, they're not really end-to-end solutions. So if you want to do GitOps, you need something more than Argo CD, because we don't do CI, for example. So you generally would hook in some CI pipeline into that. And the same thing goes for Argo Workflows and events. They're not the be-all, end-all for MLOps, but we've designed the project in such a way that they're building blocks, easily integratable building blocks. So you can take them, you're building a GitOps platform like we did at Intuit. They're easy to slide in and use as part of that. And the same thing goes for the MLOps side of things. We have Argo Workflows, like I said, also cloud native, and is used for a lot of other things than MLOps as well. They have a fair number of users that are reporting using it for infrastructure automation, or actually using it as the CI piece on the GitOps side. So you can combine them too. So that can also show some of the strength of the project, how they're really building blocks that you can switch in and out, and as you build your larger platform.
I love that. For me personally, it's really helpful to have those, kind of understand those two pieces and where the individual projects fit in. But I like that kind of additional explanation of how flexible it is, and really the building blocks at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's all. I mean, one of the key messages, one of the key things about it is automation, right? And that's GitOps, DevOps, DevSecOps, MLOps is all about. One of the key value points, and the same thing with Argo Rollouts, right? Is automation. How do we become faster? How do we become more agile without losing traceability and some control? Because it's easy to move fast, but moving fast in a repeatable fashion, or making sure that you have control over how you move fast, that's the hard part, right? And as you're moving faster on the CD side and deploying applications faster, you still need to keep track of a lot of things. The same thing goes on the ML side. You start automating your pipelines and doing that. You want to build repeatability and some checks into that as well. And that's where all this comes together.
Yeah, totally. So today we're going to focus on that kind of GitOps use case in particular in the demo. So do you want to just kind of give us a brief introduction to what the demo is going to look like today, what you'll be showing us?
I was going to show a couple of demos, and I was going to start with Argo CD, just showing from a UI standpoint, how you can deploy an application and what it looks like, and how you can roll back if something goes wrong. Generally, you would do this in, like I said, in an automated fashion through a CI pipeline or something like that. But to make it a bit more visible today, we'll do it in the UI. And then on the Argo workflow side, I'll show some pretty fairly simple ways you can use Argo workflows, but give a good understanding of the strength and the power of the orchestration engine and some things you can do there. Okay, so this is what Argo CD looks like. When you log into the UI, you can see we have some applications running here already. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through deploying a new application, and then we're going to try and upgrade that application to a new version, and we'll see how that looks in the UI and how that kind of comes together with how you would do things, in a GitOps way with Git here. So we're going to start here by creating a new application. I'm just going to call it HB Guestbook, the default project, and then we can set up our sync policies. If we want to do a manual or automatic sync, if something changes, we have some more sync options, how we want to do this sync, and then we'll do this from I'll add the path to my Git repository. Need to paste it into the right place. There we go. And then we'll do our customized guestbook. As you can see, when I paste in the repository or URL here, it actually picks up and shows me, the available repositories, the available applications that I have in my Git repos. And then we can add, if we wanted to, we can add some more customized parameters. And we can see here what image that it's picking up, 0.1 of this guestbook demo. And of course, you can also do this, just edit is YAML if we wanted to. So we'll go in and create this application, and that should get us back here. And if we click into this application, we can see that my application has been created, and we can see that I have a service and I have a deployment object created here. Right now, we can see that it says that the application health is missing. Argo CD knows about a number of Kubernetes objects, so it has these health checks built into it, so you can decide and figure out whether an object is healthy or not. Right now, we can see that the health is missing because we haven't actually deployed the application yet, so we can't figure out whether the health is good or bad. We can also see that the current sync state is out of sync because we haven't synced from our Git repos yet. Since I set up the sync is manual, we actually need to go in and do a manual sync. So we can go in here and actually do synchronization. And as we sync this, we can see things starting to happen here in the UI. We can see how we got a replica set, and we can see over here to the right that we got a pod created. So now Argo CD can actually decide and figure out that my application is healthy because it knows how to figure out the health checks for these various objects. We can also see that the current sync status is synced because what we have in Argo CD now and what's deployed actually matches what's in Git. And we can see if we go into the pod here, for example, and we can look at the live manifest, and we can see that this is actually what's running. And if we go into Git, we can see that this actually matches what's in here. So if we want to update this now to, let's say we created a new version, we did our development work, we have a new version of this guestbook. Usually you would run your CI jobs and do this automatically, but now we're actually going to go in here and update this YAML file manually and change this to a 0.2 version. And we'll just commit this straight into master. And now if we go back to Argo CD, we'll do a refresh here to speed things up a little bit. Now you can see that my sync status is out of sync because what I have deployed is actually not matching what's in Git anymore. So if we go in here, we can see that this is was running, still was running here. If we go into the UI here, we can actually see the diff. If we scroll down here, we can see that there's actually diff here that what I have running is the 0.01 version, and what Git says that it should be is 0.02. And as we've already know, Git is our source of truth, right? So now we're actually out of sync here. So if we sync again, then we tell Argo CD to go and match our application with actually what's in Git. So we see now that we have a new pod coming up here in the 0.02 version, and our 0.01 version pod was removed. So now we're healthy again, we're synced, and everything is nice and dandy. So if we go back here to Git again, and we try and update this to the 0.3 version, because we think that that's what we want to run in production. So we'll do the update in Git. We'll go into Argo CD and synchronize again. And now Argo CD is saying that something is off here. And if we were to drill into this, we could actually see that there's an error code here, the classic backoff pulling image, because it actually can't find this image because there is no 0.3 image. So right now we're in a state where it's progressing, and we'll eventually get to a degraded state because it can't resolve and fix this issue. So generally, this is where something like Argo rollouts could come in. If this was an issue with a performance issue or something else, we could automatically do a rollback here, and you could do that through your automation. But we can actually now go in and look at the history here and quickly check on one of these, point 1, point 2, and we can actually just from the UI here actually go in and quickly do a rollback, and we'll actually here just through Argo CD roll back and revert back to the point 2 version of our application. So now we can, if we do a refresh now, they can see it's actually out of sync again because Git tells us that point 3 is supposed to be the version we're running, but we're actually now rolled back since we needed to resolve this quickly here in the UI. So if you then go back to Git yet again, change this to a point 2, then I'll commit this and refresh, and we're all now healthy and synced. So like I said, generally you would do a lot of this through your automation, but this kind of shows you, how you use Git as the source of truth and how that's reflected in your application state, and how when you update Git, through your GitOps methods, methodologies, automation, and how that's reflected in your applications. So that gives you the ability to trace what's going on. You can move fast. If something happens, you can roll back. You have the state. You have the knowledge of what's going on. So that's what I was going to show about Argo CD. You can see here now we switched over to the workflows UI, and I'm going to walk you through a few fairly simple workflows and ways that you can set up and utilize workflows. These are fairly simplistic, but we'll still show some of the power behind this. And we've seen users use this for, like I said before, like anything from MLOps to CI/CD, and we know we have users like CERN that are using these massive workflows, to process data from the large Hadron Collider. So it scales from me running this on my local laptop now to CERN size, right? But so we'll try and keep it simple here and walk you through what we're doing. So we're going to start with a first basic template here and a basic workflow just to show and get you to understand what's going on in these workflows. So here we have a workflow and we have a template here. And this is going to run 3 different what's called steps. So the double dashes here indicate that the step will run after the previous step. And if it's a single dash like this hello 2b here, it means it will run in parallel with the previous step. So basically these steps are basically separate pods. And as the workflow progresses, it creates a new pod, runs the step in that pod. So these here will basically have, we have a template whale say, which can be thought of similar to like a function call in a programming language. So we have our whale say template down here, which basically fires off a container that runs cow say with an input parameter of the message we're sending into it. So we have these 3 steps: one sending in hello 1, hello 2a, and hello 2b. So we're going to run this workflow, and we'll see here the steps, and I prefer to have my layout this way. So here it starts. It's now running the hello 1 step, and remember from my spec, the second step was going to run after the first one completed, but the next 2 are going to run in parallel. So here we see that hello 1 completed, and then it fires off and runs the next two in parallel. So they should start here as the pods come up, and they should complete here very shortly. So this is just to give an idea how simple it is to get a workflow with some independent steps going. And if we check the logs here for all our steps, we can see that we have our hello 1 step, hello 2 step, and hello 3 step. So all these printed the cow say with the message we gave it. So it's just a super simple workflow just to get you started on these steps, right? Let's get into something a little bit more interesting, maybe. What you often want to do as well is you want to have some dependencies, whether it's an ML job, whether it's an infrastructure or some other job, you usually have dependencies. You want a step to complete before you run the next one. So here we have a very simple workflow that basically has, like I said earlier, a number of steps. So you can see that these all look like they will run in parallel, but they actually have a dependency. So you see that the B step here actually have a dependency on A, and C has also a dependency on A, and then D has dependency on B and C. So if you create this workflow now, we'll see that the first step gets started, and then we'll see what what happens with these dependencies. Now we're starting to see this graph A completed, B and C gets then fired off in parallel, but D, even though it's listed as being able to run in parallel, it had a dependency on B and C, so that's not going to get fired off until both of these are completed. So this is really valuable. If, like I said, no matter what your use case, there's often some dependency that needs to be fulfilled before the next step can progress, right? So this is showcasing how simple that is to set up. There, it's all complete, and I think this only prints like A, B, C, D. So something that's also very common in terms of the use cases you have is doing a recursion. So we're going to do a little workflow here that will basically do a coin flip. So just like the other workflows here, we have a template here that will run a number of steps. We have a template called flip coin here, and we basically randomizes heads versus tails. And then we have another template down here that basically prints it was heads if it happens to be heads. So we can see in this template here, we're doing some evaluation as well. So if our template here evaluates to heads, then we'll go to the heads template and basically stop. If we do tails, then we'll actually call the template itself again. So we'll get some recursion going here. Hopefully, if we get some tails. So we're going to run this and see, and hopefully we'll get some tails here to get something more exciting than a single step. So there's a very powerful part of Argo Works where we can do evaluations and set up criteria for when your next step will proceed or which step to do. And you can do things like recursion. Now you can see we've flipped the coin twice. We got tails on the first one, and then it looks like we got heads on the second one. So we didn't get too long of a chain. What this shows, a very simple way of setting up both an evaluation of a condition and also using that to do a recursion. Something else that's very, very common is that at least in early versions of workflows, since these are all pods, you want to share information between the pods. Now in later versions, we actually have something called a container set function where you can run multiple steps within a container, which makes it a bit easier to share data between the steps. But there's also of course, you can manipulate basically any Kubernetes objects. So we'll see here in this workflow, which is the last one I'll show you, we'll show you how we actually create a Kubernetes PVC. So we'll create a volume here, and then we'll use that volume in our templates here to write a message to the volume, and then we have a separate print message that will actually read from that volume. So very, very simple. This workflow will do our regular whale say print to the file system, and then we have a second step that will actually pick this data up from the file system. So this is a very, very common way that you use to move large amount of data between steps, and it's really simple to set up since everything is cloud native, everything is based on Kubernetes. Interacting with Kubernetes is really super simple, and you can use some of these like constructs like PVCs in your workflows. And this completed, and if we go into the logs here, we can see here's the message was printed and read from the volume. So super simple. And you can also do a lot more complex things. You can have sidecar containers that do things. You can set up daemons that run. Sometimes if you process massive amounts of data, you might even want to set up like a temporary database to do some sorting or do some data manipulations. You can run that as a daemon throughout your workflow and interact with it, put data into it, and get data out of it. And then when the workflow completes, it goes away. So it's really the fact that it's cloud native and based on Kubernetes makes it really, really powerful, and you get a lot of the benefits of Kubernetes at your fingertips. So I hope that kind of showcased some of the constructs within workflows. how easy it is to get some of these going and utilize them for, could be simple tasks, could be in a simple automation task that only has a few steps, could be, I've seen some of these DAGs that have thousands and thousands of lines and steps going on, when you process massive amounts of data. So it's works equally well for both extremes of sizes and stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the fantastic demos and for taking the time with us today. We will drop some links in the description. So there will be some links out to the Argo project if you want to learn more. And then we will also link out to ArgoCon, which is happening in September in the San Francisco Bay Area. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? That sounds super exciting.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. So we had the first inaugural ArgoCon last year, in early December last year. So that was the first time we tried to do a conference just around Argo. And we not in our wildest dream did we expect or hope for the response we got. And we had 3,500 people that registered and almost 2,000 people that actually was there for the conference. So it's really cool. It was all virtual last year. This year with COVID situation hopefully being better in September, we're going to target to do a hybrid event. So we're looking at having an in-person part of the event here in the Bay Area, and then have a virtual event on there. And then we're also expanding to likely to be a 3-day event. Last year was only a single day. So this year we'll have 3 days where we'll do a community day first with community sessions, maintainer sessions, contributor meetings. Then we'll have a full day of sessions, regular conference stuff. And then we'll have a day at the end where we'll have some vendors do certifications and vendor classes and things like that. So it'll be 3 pretty packed days with a really exciting mix of sessions, hands-on stuff, and really looking forward to seeing the Argo community in person.
That's fantastic. Well, fingers crossed. Things are looking good right now. So fingers crossed for that in September. And any other kind of final comments or takeaways for our audience before we wrap up?
No, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, and really enjoyed chatting with you. And for all of you out there that the 49% that don't use Argo, come to ArgoCon, hit us up on Slack. It's a very responsive community, and I think that's one of the other things we're well known for, is being very responsive and very accommodating to new people and any questions that come in. So if you're not evaluating Argo, give us a ping, and we'll help sort you out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again for taking the time today, and thank you for everyone who is joining in and listening. We'll see you all next time. Thanks to everyone out there for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Make sure to hit that like button now.
And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a new episode.
Don't forget to drop us a comment if you have any questions for today's guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see us cover in the future.
And we will see you on the next episode of Kongcast.